Alexis is joining us from Mackay Sposito. Alexis, thank you so much. You and I have collaborated for a little while now to prepare for this event today. Got referred to you by colleagues that you know, and it's really great for me to do the networking that it takes to connect folks like you, professionals like yourself, to Oregon State University students. So I'm really grateful for you taking the time to get this presentation today and sort of your willingness to make this engaging, informative, and also to be a person that folks can reach out to learn more about the potential for careers in environmental consulting. So, Alexis, thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, Fred. I appreciate it. Um, my name is Alexis Casey, and I'm an environmental scientist with Mackay Sposito. Um, one of the reasons I was excited to come and talk today is because environmental consulting was not one of the options that was presented as a possible career path for me in college. Um, I studied forestry at Berkeley, and you were kind of either going to go into private timber or you could go and work for the Forest Service, and kind of those were the two options. And so it was a more circuitous route that I came upon environmental consulting. And so I thought that this might be something you might be interested in as you're exploring your next options after college. So just for the nuts and bolts, I'm going to do a little bit of my background and kind of discuss how I came to be an environmental consultant and what that's looked like for the past while. And then talk about what is environmental consulting, what's the nature of that kind of business, go through a couple of different projects that I've worked on over the years, and to just give you a flavor of what could be out there. And then at the end, I just kind of pulled together a bunch of things like skills that I've worked on over the years, and I think it might be worth for you thinking about how to prioritize these skills as you're exploring your next options. And so we will have time for questions in at the end, but we have somebody, her name's Olivia, and she's in the background monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, we can potentially stop at that point or wait till the end. Doesn't have to be that formal. We're also going to do some interactive spots where we do a little bit of brainstorming about certain topics using a QR code and like a brainstorming app. So just keep an eye out for a QR code, and then you can put in some words. So I mentioned that I found my way to environmental consulting. So how does somebody get there? I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was a kid or when I was in college, but I was a real curious kid. I was always lifting up rocks, looking at bugs, all that sort of thing. And I loved being outside. And so when I went to college at Berkeley, I found every class that had a field trip. And so if it was rocks for jocks, then I was there looking at rocks. If it was clapping for credit and astronomy, I was there like figuring out a way to be outside. I just loved it. And that eventually led me to a major in forestry because they had an entire summer field program. And I'm sure Oregon State has something similar where I took classes in the Sierras for an entire summer. And that was it. I was hooked. And uh, that's kind of where this path went for me. After college, I did a little pivot. I thought, I really was interested in environmental mediation. I wanted to work with different stakeholders and help them figure out hard problems. And so I thought the only way to do it was to go to law school. And so that's actually what brought me to Oregon. And I went to Willamette for about a semester, figured out law school wasn't a great fit. And I took a hard pivot from there. It was one of those things that it was probably at that time the hardest thing I'd ever come across, where it was something I was a smart kid up to that point, and I hadn't really found a situation where I couldn't really work through it. But I will say that there hasn't been a day that I haven't uh, regretted making that decision at that time. And so law school brought me to Oregon, and but then after trying out law school and not sticking with it, I met a friend of a friend who was an environmental consultant, and she was talking it up, and she said, you might consider it. She passed my resume along, and then that was the beginning of me working 12 years at that company. I started at entry level and got to work on a lot of different things. Um, since then, I got married, had a family. we had the opportunity to go abroad and live in Germany for 5 years. So I took a break um, and lived in Germany there. I wasn't working when we were abroad. And then I returned to the States about 3.5 years ago and had stayed connected with folks that I'd worked with before. And a friend was starting an environmental group at Mackay Sposito. And she was like, hey, I'd love it if you come work with us. And the problem was the firm is in Vancouver, Washington, and we had landed in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And she said, not a problem, remote work's an option. And so I work remotely out of my home, but then I go up to Vancouver periodically and work with my team on site. So at this point, I'm a senior environmental scientist. I'm also a team lead, so I manage 3 folks on my team. I'm the person on my team that it deals mostly with Endangered Species Act compliance. That's a federal law, and I manage complex projects. So that's kind of how I've come to today. Let's see. Next slide. Thanks, Olivia. Um, so you might ask yourself, what is environmental consulting? It's kind of a broad term. And in its simplest terms, it's when people or organizations or companies pay for expertise. So they have a problem that they're trying to solve and they need help. They have a project they need designed and they need help. They have permits that they need prepared or reports and they need help. They either don't have the capacity to do it themselves in-house if they maybe work at a smaller city or a place where they don't have a big environmental staff, or they just don't have the capacity to do it. And so they hire the expertise from someone like me or the firm that I work for. So I work in mostly environmental consulting, so having to do with environmental permits. But the firm that I work for is multidisciplinary. So we are, I would say, primarily engineers, so civil engineers. And then there's folks that design roads and water systems. We also have people that do professional land survey and then landscape architecture, as well as a lot of other different things. But just to say that we do a lot of different things, and I'm like kind of one piece of that work. The thing that I really like about environmental consulting is that it's never the same. So because it's on a project by project basis, you don't kind of know what's going to come in the door. And so it's hard to get bored, I guess. You don't know what a project you're working on in 2 years. It might be in a cool location, it might be with interesting people. And so I've really enjoyed that diversity in that the types of works that come across my plate. And now that I'm kind of farther along in my career, I get to help figure out what kinds of projects we go and try to win. And our motto for our group is cool people, cool projects. And it sounds kind of silly, but at its basic level, like we want to work on things that we're motivated and excited about, and we want to work with people that we like working with. You can have a great project, but the people aren't great. And so it just makes for a tough experience. And so we look for that balance. It doesn't always work. Not every project is cool. Not all people are cool. It can be, but that is just kind of our guiding principle as we're looking for what types of projects we want to work on. And so over the years, I've surveyed for all different kinds of species. I've worked with spotted owls, bald eagles, goshawks, and songbirds. I've done fish surveys. I've been electrofishing, which is when you zap fish in a stream to move them out of the way. I've worked with amphibians. I do rare plant surveys, work with mushrooms and lichens and mosses. I've also had the opportunity to backpack for project work and traveled and seen places all over in Oregon and Washington for work, and really places in those states that I never would have come across otherwise, say as a tourist or just, exploring on my own. I will say I've also worked in amazing weather and absolutely horrendous weather. So I've worked in cold, in the wet, the snow, heat, bugs, all sorts of different things. But I've also worked in some of the most beautiful places that you almost forget that you're there for work and not just for pleasure. And so, yeah, that's been my experience so far. I'm going to jump in to start to talk about projects that I've worked on in the next slide. Oops, I don't have my thing up. You've already switched it. So early on in my career, I had the great opportunity to work on a monitoring project for urban peregrine falcon nests in the Portland metro area. There's a lot of bridges in Portland, and peregrine falcons like to use bridges for their nests. And so I was hired by the Department of Transportation, and they had me go out and look at the different urban nests and then figure out what they were up to. The reason this was important to the Department of Transportation is because they have emergency maintenance that they have to do on their bridges or construction projects. And those activities can be in conflict with nesting birds. And so, um, at its basic level, it comes down to safety. These peregrine falcons they're amazing birds. If you're not familiar with them, a peregrine falcon is about the size of a crow, but it can fly, they've shown up to 200 miles an hour. So really interesting. They are super aggressive and territorial. And if they are nesting, they don't want anybody in their territory. So if you can picture a maintenance worker needs to go on a bridge and fix something while they're nesting, Mama Peregrine Falcon is going to have nothing, not going to allow it. And so it's a safety issue for construction workers. And then if they did for some reason have something break on a bridge that had to be fixed immediately and the birds were in the middle of nesting, they're very sensitive at that point. And so the nests can be abandoned, the eggs can be abandoned. All of those are things that the Department of Transportation wanted to avoid. And so that's why they hired me and some of the folks that I work with to go monitor these nests so that we could keep an eye on them and help them adaptively manage the species on their urban bridges. So I wanted to give you a picture of what it was like to monitor these birds. You're picturing like it's super easy peasy, great work, but the work starts in February. You have to be there at sunrise. So my alarm would go off at 4 in the morning, and then I would know I'd have to be on site. The monitoring window is 4 hours. So you need everything that you have to have for a 4 hour period. So for me, that would be warm gear, snacks, coffee, but not too much coffee because it's 4 hours and you can't leave the site. Just think about the logistics of that. I need all my like actual gear. I had a scope that I used to watch the birds, binoculars, a tripod to put my scope on it. I would drive through the streets of Portland. One nest site was on the I-205 bridge, the Glen Jackson. And so we would take a boat from the Oregon side to an island on the middle of the Columbia, hike through the island, and then set up on the point of the island so that we could watch the birds at the Glen Jackson Bridge. And so, you're out in the middle of the Columbia. It's absolutely gorgeous. And it's game time because these birds are fast and they will move in a heartbeat. If you blink, they're gone. And I'm looking for very specific behaviors. So I'm trying to figure out if they are interested in nesting on the bridge. I'm trying to figure out if they have laid eggs. I'm trying to figure out if they have laid eggs, did those eggs hatch? If the eggs have hatched, how old are the birds? All that information is really helpful as they're trying to manage potential maintenance activities or construction work on the bridges. And so I thought of myself kind of as a detective because I can't see directly into the nest, but I can see these different types of behaviors, and that tells me what's going on in the nest. So this was something I worked on for the better part of 10 years. It was really cool to be able to really get to know a species this in depth and became, kind of a local expert when it comes to these birds. Got to work really closely with the Audubon Society. And then because we had this year after years of data on what the urban nests were doing, I would go to conferences and speak about the things that we had learned about this species and what ODOT was doing to kind of help it in an urban environment. So I would say I was a nerdy person before, but this project made me a bird nerd. And now I look for every opportunity to find peregrine falcons. They are in a lot of different places. And it's just, I really, really loved getting to know about this species. All righty. So we're gonna switch gears. So this, you can use your phone and scan the QR code and it will bring up um, an app called Slido. And so we're gonna brainstorm about what you think of first when you think of the words construction monitoring. Oops. Oh,
Alexis, can you still see my screen of the word map coming up?
yes, I can. And
Okay,
we
great.
tried it before, and so that was my word
Okay,
from
great.
before.
Oh,
Not
perfect.
exactly applicable, but I'll just give folks a chance to put some things in. You don't have to think too hard about it. Hard hats, safety, yes, all of those things.
Looks like we have a question about can they access the link on a computer? Perhaps they don't have their phone handy. Uh,
Oh, I see.
so we might not be able to get a response from everyone. I'm not sure, Olivia, if we have a link we could pop in the chat. But oh,
Let me
thank
give
you.
that.
Olivia just popped the link in there.
Let me know if that doesn't work. I'm new to this little program.
Let's see here. Give people another minute or two, or not a minute or two, maybe another minute. So for the peregrine falcons, some of these bridges you had to monitor from on the bridge. And so the I-5 crossing from Oregon to Washington, which maybe folks have been over before, we'd actually have to go up in that bridge. And I'm not terribly thrilled about heights. And so that wasn't always my favorite thing to do. But permitting regulations, yes, all of those things. Great. Olivia, will you switch to the next slide? Great. Let's see here. I love the way that the AI can generate images for the thing that I'm talking about. So this is a cartoon image, but I just wanted to give you an idea of one project that where I had to do some construction monitoring. And to set the stage, um, we had been working on some permits for a project. The city was building a boardwalk trail near a stream, and that stream had salmon in it. And so we had a lot of different permit requirements that they had to build it a certain way so that they could be within the requirements of those permits. And I was asked to go on site and to make sure that they were sticking with those commitments that we had made in the permit requirements and make sure that they were in compliance. And so normally this would involve for me going and just seeing if they were adhering to what's called avoidance and minimization measures. So that's, are they doing everything they can to minimize the potential for an environmental impact? And usually that had to do with making sure the construction equipment was clean and that if there were any leaks, that we noted them and that they were attended to quickly. We also had to make sure that they had containment around things like fuel sources or equipment with large fuel tanks in case if there were any issues that fuel or that contaminant would be contained. Also making sure if there are any sensitive areas nearby, like wetlands, are they staying out of those areas? And then if there's exposed soil and there's the potential for rain events, making sure that that soil was either temporary or permanently stabilized so that it wouldn't be moving into the nearby streams or waterways. So that was my plan when I got to the site. Had my little checklist, got my hard hat, a lot of the things that we brainstorm about. Needed to make sure I had the appropriate footwear. I've got my orange vest on. So when I get there to the site, one of the commitments that was made in the permit requirements is they were going to install the supports for this bridge, so those vertical pieces, with something called a vibratory hammer instead of an impact hammer. So if you can picture, you're pounding a post in, and with an impact hammer, you're hitting it over and over again. What we had permitted instead was a vibratory hammer, which is they just kind of like, I guess the best way to describe it is jiggle it in and But it was important because there are listed fish in the stream nearby, and studies have shown that percussive impact has a negative effect on nearby fish, and in particular salmon that are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And so we had said, hey, we're going to build this with the vibratory hammers so that those impacts will be minimized. And so you don't need to worry about it. That impact causes sound waves to go underwater, and fish have fish bladders, they get affected. I don't necessarily understand the specifics of the science of what happens to the fish, but my understanding is that it's not good for them. And so we had made commitments in the permits that they were going to install these supports with a vibratory hammer. But I get there and they're using the impact hammer instead. And so I have to decide, what do I do in this situation? We said we were going to do it a certain way. There's all sorts of different options of how you can handle this. And some of the things that were running through my head as I was looking at this problem was that, my client, who is the city building this, is at risk of violating their permits. If a regulator were to come on site right now, they would see that was not adhering to the permits. I also know that a lot of cases contractors want to build things quickly because quickly means that it's the least expensive way for them to build something. And so not always, but often, or in some cases, they can look for shortcuts or look for the easiest way to build something. And in this case, it's quicker for them to install these supports with an impact hammer versus a vibratory hammer. It is slower to use the vibratory hammer. I'm also thinking about the fact that I've worked really hard with the regulators that we work with to make sure that they know that we have a professional relationship, and that when I write a permit a certain way and I make those commitments, I do everything I can to make sure that they are followed through with. And in terms of what could happen for the city if the permits are violated, when the next time they go to get permits for a project, they could be in a situation where the regulatory agencies were like, hey, you did a bad job the last time. Why would we give you a permit for it this time? So all of these things are running through my head. Um, and so I'm also not in a place where I can say, hey, contractor, you need to stop work. That's not my role in this project. I'm observing, I'm taking notes, I'm doing all those things. I call my project manager in the office. They call their client. We take 2 to 3 days of back and forth negotiation, trying to figure out, when you, and this is what happened on this project, is that the contractor said in our permits, they thought we said we could use a vibratory hammer as opposed to an impact hammer. And we were like, no, it was a should. You had to use it that way. So sometimes it just comes down to semantics. In trying to figure out, how much weight do those words have that we used in the permit applications. And so we just made it really clear, hey, this is what's required. If you don't do it, then the permits are in violation and we have to figure out a different path. And so long story short, they switched to the less environmentally impactful method, which was the vibratory hammer, and that would minimize impact to the fish that were there and nearby. But this is a tricky situation that I came across that I learned a lot about, how to navigate difficult situations. All right, we're going to try our brainstorming tool again before we talk about the third project. Are we doing okay on time, Fred?
Yeah, and I think we'll definitely have some Q&A. Folks
Great,
are putting questions in the chat as well. So, yep.
great. All righty, so same method. I'm sure Olivia will throw it in there. So what do you think of when you think of the word stormwater? Oh, same look should work from before. Chemicals, water quality, debris, containment, discharges.
For the record, I'm the one that spelled debris incorrectly.
It's French. It's fine. Got one more person typing. Chemicals, flooding, rain. Yes, all of those things come to mind. Alrighty. So I'm going to talk about this third project example. And so this is something that I've been working on more recently. And when I came back to consulting after living abroad, when I started working at Mackay Sposito, they had a number of different projects kind of in this similar vein. And so um, they were hired to help design an improvement to roads. And this is in particular a project in Battleground, Washington. So suburban, urban environment, and they are tearing up the roads in this area and then rebuilding them. Because it's a pretty expensive project, they needed the federal government to pitch in and help pay for it. With that federal connection comes more requirements, more scrutiny, more process for how they use that money for this project. And so you might ask yourself, why would a wildlife biologist be involved in a project where they're just tearing up the road and rebuilding it? My little AI generator go and explain it in simple equation, but there are tire additives that tire companies are using right now. In particular, there's one called 6-PPDQ. And this is a, a chemical that when it breaks down, so when you brake in your car or when you're driving in your car, parts of the tire break down and then they're left on the road. When the rains come through, they wash these particles off of the road and then they can enter nearby streams. So we have this tire additive, this with a chemical in it that's getting into our streams. And then at the same time, in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of salmon species that are listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So that includes like Chinook salmon, coho salmon, and steelhead. And so they're in our urban and suburban streams nearby. So we've got the additive, and that plus salmon is trouble for salmon. And so there's something called salmon mortality syndrome. And that is when pollutants like 6-PPDQ come into contact with salmon, it causes death or changes in behavior. And so it's just really not good for them. And so this is an area of kind of new science. We've just been learning about it in the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, that these different additives or pollutants are causing a lot of problems for listed salmon. And the thing with 6-PPDQ that's tricky is that they're not sure how small of amount of this tire additive causes salmon mortality syndrome. And so some studies say that like 1 part per million can cause a detrimental effect on a salmon. And so it's really tough to design things to prevent this additive from going in if we're not even sure if just even 1 particle per million gets through and touches the salmon. And at the same time, the departments of transportation, they know about this tire additive and they're building projects with federal money, and they're really concerned about being sued because these pollutants that are coming off the roads that they're building are killing and damaging listed salmonids or listed salmon. So up to this point, I kind of worked on a lot of different projects involving spotted owls or marmolets. These are species that are listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And I'd worked on some projects that involved salmon where they were replacing a bridge or a culvert. And so they're actually doing work in a stream where salmon are known to occur. If you could switch to the next slide. But this is a different problem because it's not, the effects are actually happening downstream from the project area and sometimes, and in a lot of cases, later in time. So it's farther away geographically and it's going down the stream system. So it's a little bit harder to visualize the impact. And so my job is to analyze these potential effects from this project and then work with design engineers to figure out a way to put in some stormwater treatment measures, in this case, water quality treatment facilities that can prevent these tire additives or pollutants from moving downstream in the water column. And so for 6-ppq, what the current science is saying is the best that we can do, which is not great, but it's the best that we can do at this point, is use water quality treatment facilities that contain a different combination of media that absorbs or retains those pollutants, so it sucks it up before it has a chance to move downstream. And while I'm working with engineers, there are requirements for how much treatment they need to provide. But sometimes we have projects where they only are required to provide a certain amount of treatment, but they might have the opportunity to provide more. And so trying to find a way that it works for the project, works for that client, or we can maybe do a little bit better than just what's required. So the next slide just shows you not this project that I'm working on is in the city of Battleground outside Vancouver, but we are looking at the downstream effects all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and that includes the main stem Columbia River. And there's numerous different types of listed fish that use the Columbia River as a migration corridor. And so there's a lot of different fish that have to be analyzed as potentially being impacted by these projects. And because this analysis now needs to go all the way to the Pacific Ocean, one thing that I found particularly funny about this process is that now includes that I had to look at how this project could impact killer whales. So killer whales are not in the Columbia River, don't worry. They are out at the Pacific Ocean where the Columbia meets the Pacific Ocean. And one of their primary prey species is Chinook salmon. And so because this project has the potential to impact Chinook salmon, which is the primary prey species for killer whales, which are also listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act, now killer whales are, addressed and analyzed as potentially being impacted by a road improvement project in Vancouver, Washington. So it's kind of a long backstory about these types of projects, but it's something I've been working on the last couple of years. It's an interesting problem. The science is new and evolving, which makes for me really interesting. I also really enjoy working with engineers and trying to come up with creative solutions for these kind of tricky problems. And I wouldn't have said 10 years ago that this is something that I would have enjoyed working on, but now that I've been working on it a lot lately, it's been really enjoyable. And so I just wanted to share this kind of an example with you as something we're working on. And this is a GIS map that was prepared for one of these projects. So we're kind of looking at spatial data there. All righty.
Great. Well, thank you for these examples because I think being able to do kind of a case study of what it's like in these projects is useful for students, right? Because they need to kind of do some networking, asking good questions, and hopefully this elucidates kind of what the realities on the ground are like. Example of what kind of hammer to use in constructing like these bridges. That's something I never would have thought of. So that helps
Yeah.
us like make meaning of, wow, that's kind of the types of considerations that are relevant. Great. And then it looks like you're asking, what are some skills that I should start developing now? That's actually really tied in with our first question, which the question was, what classes in university best prepare you for your career? So maybe classes and skills, like if you wanted to give some examples.
Yeah. I think at the undergraduate level, that exposing yourself to as much as possible is kind of, I think, what was important for me. Just getting a little bit of a look at all sorts of different options. And then, as far as the skill, I mean, I guess if you were to ask me what classes I wish I had taken in college, I wish I had taken more plant taxonomy. I didn't have enough, and I really had to learn it on the job. But what I did learn was where to find the information that I was looking for. And so that's why I think it's important to get a really as much general broad knowledge as you can, because you're not going to be an expert on everything. But if you have a good idea of where to find that information, I think that's what I would suggest. But as far as skills, and these are less on the technical side of things, but things that just I've learned working with people and working in a professional environment, I would really encourage you to find ways to practice your communication skills, and whether that's in the written form or public speaking. It's hard. People don't like public speaking, but it is invaluable. And just being able to communicate what you're trying um, to the words and information that you're trying to get across is I think an underrated skill, whether that's in email, whether that's in chat, whether that's all the different communication methods that we have. Um, I have just been, uh, I mean, doing this talk is an example for me. I haven't had an opportunity to public speak in a while. This was a great opportunity to, work with Fred and then also practice my public speaking skills. I think of it as a muscle. If you don't practice it and use it, then it's out of you're not as good at it. And so looking for those opportunities is really something that I would encourage you to do. Thinking about skills, it's less a class that you could take, but classes with group projects where you have to work with different types of people. You might think they're silly in the moment, but they're training you to work with different types of people in the professional environment. And so, when I had group projects, I would try to figure out who was the most responsible, who could I count on to make sure that they would do a good job. I would instead encourage you to seek out people that you don't necessarily gravitate towards, or that maybe you're a tougher person to work for. Use it as an example of a time where you don't always get to choose who you get to work with in a professional setting. And so practicing that skill of trying to work with somebody that you don't necessarily mesh with right off the bat, I think is really important and something that will benefit you later in your career. Um, as far as skills when it comes to relationship building, I think that's also, whether it's in the classroom environment or in your personal relationships, um, I really approach relationships with curiosity. I like people, I find them fascinating. And so when I am trying to figure out how to connect with people, I just really approach that whole thing with curiosity, I guess. Um, And I mentioned earlier, I decided at one point to kind of go down this law school route and figured out that wasn't a good fit for me. It was really hard, as you can imagine. I had a path that I thought I was going towards and then had to take a hard pivot. Um, it was well, I don't even want to call it a mistake because it was like one of the best learning experiences that I had, and I learned a ton from it. And so I would just say, give yourself grace for mistakes like that. I don't even want to call it mistakes. Grace for making, having different challenges. You learn a lot about what you don't, you learn a lot about just as much checking off the things that you don't want to do as the things that you do want to do. I think we get a lot focused on, I need to find out what I do want to do. But I think it's also important and it's helpful that you check off the stuff that you don't want to do. And yeah.
Yeah, when you mentioned the importance of communication skills, I imagine managing stakeholders' expectations in some of these projects is difficult because maybe you're representing compliance and that to them might seem as a barrier or a hindrance or a
Mhm.
frustration. Would you be able to speak to how you've utilized your communication skills to help manage those kinds of situations?
Yeah, I think it goes back to building relationships. If I can find a way to connect with people um, on a personal level, um, I work remotely out of my home. And so I have to work really hard on developing those relationships. And so I always take the time to ask about somebody's dog or their kid or this or that. And again, I mentioned I find people fascinating. And so it's not work for me to do that kind of, softer skill. But from that point, I think when people see that you are interested in them as a human being, like I think that's a great foundation from then going forward and trying to figure out and work on hard problems. Um, I think there's a lot of tools for like frameworks for to work through um, communication in hard situations or where you have conflicting I don't know viewpoints. And so I try to talk to people that I trust or mentors that I've worked with and get really honest feedback about how I worked in a certain situation? Did they have any ideas for improvement? And so just always trying to improve that skill. But not everybody's going to like you. And I guess that was also something that was hard for me to swallow. I'm a people pleaser at my core. And so realizing that I didn't have to come out of every situation with a new best friend, like we could still come to a agreement about a certain particular hard situation. And that is a goal that is worth achieving in that situation.
Great. Yeah, and those skills make sense regardless of students' academic background. Another question we had was around a student who has the academic major of oceanography. So, Alexis, could you speak to your awareness of any consultancy kind of opportunities for students who are interested in oceanography? Or do you see that, as they say, terrestrial work in the field is probably more common for environmental consultancy work?
I think anywhere that there's problems that people need solved, there are consultants out there that can help with that. I'm not as familiar with work in the oceanography realm, but what I would suggest is to check out the professional societies that maybe speak more to that. I'm a member of the Wildlife Society, and they have conferences and they put out bulletins and all that sort of thing. And that's a way for me to keep an eye on the science that is around that work that I do. I would assume that there's something similar in the oceanography realm, and that they would be a good resource. And that's just another plug for getting involved in a professional society. I think it's a great place as a college student to explore what's out there. Um, I went to forestry conferences in college. I got to see what types of opportunities were out there. I got to network with people that were in similar spaces as me and then see what kind of job opportunities might be out there. So I would, and they're really great also at putting out jobs that are available in those areas. And so that can be a good way to look at different opportunities in maybe an oceanography realm. I can't think of a professional society right off the top of my head that speaks specifically to oceanography, but I assume that your professors would maybe be a good resource there and could guide you um, to to one that would help.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question. Are there current opportunities for species monitoring projects in the Portland metro region? And if so, what qualities do you specifically value in applicants for those kinds of opportunities?
Let's see. I was actually just looking at a Wildlife Society bulletin and it was all sorts of different career opportunities. And that is like later in career, entry level, technician, summer, seasonal work. And there was spotted owl work. It may not have been in the Portland metro region, but I think again that would be a good place to check out. And the nice thing about, I know particularly with the Wildlife Society, they have student membership rates. So yeah, there's a discounted rate for students, and then a lot of times you can go to their conferences and participate at a discounted or reduced rate. And so that is a really great opportunity that you might explore as well. I don't know of any specific monitoring jobs that are available at this moment. I probably have to do a little bit of research, but I would say the Wildlife Society would be a great resource as you're looking into those kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, I just popped in the Oceanographic Society in the chat
Yeah,
for that previous question, but I think, Alexis, to your point, there's so much information out there. It's hard to have it all right on hand. But
yeah,
I found that there's just so much I can find if I bookmark sites and keep an eye on them. Keeping track of all the information out there is a part-time job in and of itself.
yeah.
Especially
Well, and
students that are,
the email you sent out with this talk had job opportunities and working in different labs. And I was looking through, like, there was a wealth of information there as well. So it looks like that you guys, Oregon State is helping guide students in that way as well. Sorry to interrupt.
cool. Yeah, no, the weekly newsletter, I encourage all of you on the call, if you're not reading that, take a good look at it. Hopefully it's just a springboard to get you started on your ongoing research. Yeah. Okay, the next question we have is when considering grad school, Do you think a master's is beneficial if consulting is the end goal? And the follow-up to that is, if so, if grad school is beneficial, do you recommend a science-based program or more of a policy management type of program?
An interesting question. So I was
Hmm.
just working on a proposal for a project where we want to work for this one client, and they require master's degrees for certain job categories for that. So in that one example, yes, having an advanced degree would allow you to fit into certain categories on those elements. That said, I don't have an advanced degree, and it hasn't been a barrier for me up to this point. What I didn't do as part of an advanced degree, I've made up for with um, years in consulting. So in the times where the projects or proposals have asked for a certain master's degree, you can often substitute that with years of experience. And so I think you can get at it both ways. That said, as far as whether to go on the policy side or the more science side, I think it really depends on what you're interested in. I think both, there's a place for both types of person in environmental consulting. And so I think I would, I mean, because it's a commitment to go towards a master's degree. It should be something you're interested in. If you're more of a sciencey person, then I would say science. If you're more policy or more social, softer skills, then maybe gravitate towards the less sciencey one. I work with people that have the hard science master's degrees, but then also maybe planning or other less science heavy master's degrees. So there's both examples there in my experience.
Yeah, I like to tell students choose the master's degree that can help you pay your way through a teaching assistantship or research
Yeah.
assistantship. If you can't find those, trying your hand at what you can do with your bachelor's degree for a year or two, you'll learn something. Maybe you'll learn about a
Yep.
lot of things you don't want to do, like you said earlier, but that's still a valuable experience. And um, the more organizations you can get on your resume, even if it's some kind of a volunteer capacity, but it's a legitimate following your
Mhm.
curiosity, become established with organizations and networks that are meaningful to you, that in the long run is the payoff, I believe. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, like we discussed, it can be a financial commitment to go on for an advanced degree, and so that's something you'll have to weigh as you're looking at those options. The thing that I've liked about kind of the wildlife environmental side of things is that there's a lot of seasonal work out there. And so if you want to explore different parts of the country, or if you want to explore different kinds of work, like there are great opportunities where maybe a consulting firm will have just a summer job. They're just staffing up for one particular project in Nevada for burrowing owls or something like that, or for wetland work in Florida. And so you could, try maybe a different part of the country, try a different kind of work, and it builds experience, but you're not committed, for one company or one location for the long term. And so I would encourage folks to keep an eye out for like that seasonal work. It can be a great way to try different things on.
well, Alexis, when we had initially connected, you had expressed a real desire to be helping early professionals sort of explore career opportunities, based on your background, your experience, and your willingness to help. Would it be okay if students reached out to you through your contact information?
Yeah, um, I put my LinkedIn profile right here, and
Nice.
this is another spot that would be just a plug to have a LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
It's a great professional network. It's a great way to put yourself out there. People can connect with you. I use it all the time. I think, you know, back in the day, we used to hand out business cards. Now, if I meet somebody, I'm like, let's find each other on LinkedIn so that we can then connect from that point. It's a great way to see what kind of like education experience, what kind of projects. It's also, the more you put into it, the better you can have a profile put together. Olivia's on the call. She's great because she'll help us, give us tips about our LinkedIn profiles. And then we can make it a better resource. But I would say give it a try, put up a profile, and then just see what comes of it as you're, starting your next steps.
So if they reach out to you on LinkedIn, you'll connect with them, it sounds like.
Yep, yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being, so generous with your time and your wealth of experience. And I want to thank folks for coming today. I always say this, but career development starts with showing up, and you showed up today. So be proud of that. I think being persistent and consistent around engaging with professionals in all different ways is there's no substitute for it. So um, Alexis, thanks again for those great examples of how you've been doing projects in environmental consultancy work. Those are great examples. And thanks again for everyone showing up today. I think that's all we have for today, but keep looking at the newsletter for future talks like this one. And thanks again, Alexis and Olivia, for being here today. And everyone, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.